A while ago we got the first glimpse of the skill trees in Veilguard, so let's have a deeper look. Specializations will return from the last games, and this time around every class will have 3 to choose from. For warriors, Slayer, Reaper and Champion, 2 unknowns and the probably familiar Champion. For rogues, Duelist, Veil Ranger and Saboteur. As with the warrior, the Duelist is probably the most familiar from the previous 2, but as for Ranger and Saboteur, there's only guesswork to be had, which we will get to later. For mages, Deathcaller, Evoker and Spellblade. Going thrice, but we will probably know what to expect of the Spellblade from previous games. Given what we've seen in the gameplay reveal, for rogues at least, you can use weapons interchangeably, switching from melee to bow. So it seems prudent to assume that every specialization will focus on one combat aspect. So let's have a deeper look at them, but keep in mind that this is all speculation and sort of educated guesswork based on the previous games. From taking a closer look at the artwork on the skill tree, it seems that Slayers will focus on two-handed combat, which would be in tune with the previous games because Slayers seem to be most akin to Berserkers in Origins, which means that they will focus on hitting as hard as they can at the cost of all of their stamina. An ability I'd imagine we see return in this skill tree is Final or Death Blow, however you want to call it, an ability that will take all of your stamina to deal as much damage as you can, hopefully outright killing an enemy. Again, from the artwork, it could be that Reavers focus less on weapons and more on abilities. In previous games, the Reaver used dark means to deal damage to enemies using their own health or using something akin to blood magic or necromancy to heal their own life. Devour is probably the most likely to make a return here, an attack that rips into the enemy and heals you for the damage dealt. At least that's how it worked in Inquisition. In Origins it was a bit different, there you were basically just a corpse eater. A return for most games and definitely the least mysterious here. The Champion is most definitely focused on one-handed and shield combat. Champions are picture book tanks, but with the addition of being able to throw your shield, maybe they'll build and expand on that a little bit. Other than that, they might go the route of supporting and buffing your companions or debuffing your enemies, whichever works for you. There is no single ability that stands out to make a return, but I would like to see a variant of To the Death, an ability where you challenge an enemy to a duel, dealing more damage the longer it goes on, but also taking more the longer it goes on. So, that covers warriors, onto the rogues. Most likely that this specialization will focus on the melee side of things, given the artwork and the nature of a duelist. Duelists have been in the games twice already, once in Origins and once in Dragon Age 2, but without a common threat to them. In Origins they focused mostly on proper stance and imposing disadvantages on enemies or buffing themselves. In Dragon Age 2 they focused more on the actual dueling part, being able to challenge enemies to single combat. How it'll play out in Veilguard is anyone's best guess, but I think a challenge skill could be fun. Other than that, I imagine it will focus on buffing the defense of the rogue, being able to parry or roll or riposte or something like that. Kind of an odd one out. Most definitely focused on ranged combat, but other than that, not much that we can know about it. There has been a ranger spec in Origins, but that had nothing to do with the Veil or the Fade. They were able to summon companions, but again not through magic, just ranger things. Curious what they come up with? Let's wait and see. I imagine the Saboteur will focus on abilities, making use of both weapon types along the way. It might be a mix between Tempest and Artificer from Inquisition, making use of alchemy to buff yourself or throwing traps at enemies, but that's just what it feels like to me. It might also be more inclined towards assassins, you know, sabotage by murder, and using stealth to run around the battlefield unseen and then attack from the shadows. That covers rogues. Now, last but not least, mages. And since I doubt that they'll give mages the ability to wield sword and shield or sword and staff like some flashy Gandalf, I imagine that the specializations for mages will enhance one part of the regular mage gameplay. Otherwise known as Necromancer, but I suppose that would have been far too obvious. Not a spec we had in previous games, but then again Necromancers aren't a new concept. Summoning skeletons is basically a given, if only so Manfred can have a chat with his relatives. Other than that, debuffing through curses is usually a thing that falls within the Necromancer's skill tree. Of the 3 mage specs, this is probably the most likely to focus on staff combat, for the following reasons. Going from the artwork, it seems that the Evoker is the most likely to focus on spells and abilities, and given the name, it might be through summoning magic, but I think that's unlikely given that we have the Necromancer, which is kind of their thing, and also it wasn't really a thing in previous games. So the other option is that they could focus on spirit and arcane and force magic, which is something we had before in, I think, all 3 games. It could also be focused on elemental magic, ice, fire, earth and such, but given that Firewall is in the basic skill tree, I have my doubts whether or not they would put elemental abilities in a specialization. At last, something familiar for mages. At least with Spellblade, you know what you're getting into, which is thick of the fight melee combat. It's a specialization we had before in Origins and Awakening, and the Knight Enchanter in Inquisition, which was overpowered enough to essentially one-hit a dragon. Whether or not it's fully focused on melee, basically replacing the staff, or if it's a mix between the two, remains to be seen. And that's it. Keep in mind that all of this is guesswork based on the artworks and the vibes they give me, so it could all be entirely wrong, but it's fun to speculate. In diesem Sinne, if you want to keep in touch with me, links below the sub button. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all very, very soon. Goodbye.